everyone. I'm Tyler Cohen Wood, guest host for Cybercrime magazine, and today we're at the Global Cyber Innovation Summit in Baltimore, Maryland. I'm here with Adam Fletcher, who is the managing director and CISO of Blackstone, and we're here for an Ask the CISO interview sponsored by Fortinet. Thank you so much for being here, Adam.
Thanks for having me.
So you went to a great school, Cornell, and you graduated with a BS in Operations Research and Industrial Engineering. How did you end up making that leap into cyber tech after that?
Well, I was always involved in technology. Even some of my earliest memories, my dad always had, kind of a computer, even when they were essentially suitcases that you had to, lug around with a handle and a keyboard that kind of fit into the giant box. And I was, involved with technology throughout middle and high school, back in the days of 16.8K modems and bulletin boards and things like that. I worked at the Mac help desk, at Cornell, and always had a recent computer in my dorm room or in my fraternity house, usually paid for with credit that college students probably shouldn't have. And then after school, I went to technology, and I started with Deloitte as a technology analyst, and I learned Power Builder and Oracle at Deloitte training camp, and neither of those turned out to be useful to me on the projects that I was on, but a friend of mine called and said, I worked with you at the help desk, at Cornell. I know you're good with computers. I just started with this IT security company here in New York. What do you know about, IT security? I said, nothing. He said, well, it'll be a lateral move salary-wise, but we can offer you stock options. And at that point, 1999, the bubble hadn't burst yet. So I put two thumbs up and said, yeah, let's do it.
And the rest is history.
Yeah.
So I see that early in your career, you also worked for Internet Security Systems, ISS, and of course, being one of the early and very successful intrusion detection companies and incident response. What did you do there, and what was it like working for a really hot security startup at that time?
So I actually worked for ISS by acquisition of a small value-added reseller called Netrex. Netrex was, I think, one of the first VARs that sold Checkpoint and Nokia appliances, and actually one of the first that I'm aware of that did managed security services. So back in those days when customers didn't actually have firewalls, Netrex had a services business that would go and install Checkpoint firewalls on customers' brand new T1 lines. And then they would manage those firewalls and potentially, an antivirus solution and a token, two-factor authentication solution on top of managing the firewalls remotely from their SOC in Southfield, Michigan. When ISS acquired Netrex, one of the prevailing reasons for that acquisition was this MSSP. And my first project as an ISS employee was actually to go to Brazil, specifically Rio, and be the technical implementer of a security operations center and an MSSP for Embratel, the Brazilian telephone and internet company. So as an ISS employee, I spent basically my entire tenure down in Rio, building a SOC.
That is so exciting.
Yeah, it wasn't awful.
So you're also a founding board member of the Security Advisor Alliance. So tell us a bit about the organization, how you got involved, and what you're doing there now.
So I think the Security Advisor Alliance, my association goes back to the founding when Jason Clark and a few other people had kind of a vision to address a few key areas where they felt that the cybersecurity community could come together, and specifically CISOs could come together. Number one, to help each other. Kind of the by CISOs for CISOs model in order to collaborate and share best practices and help kind of raise the tide and all ships, by extension, to help educate the next generation of cybersecurity leaders, both, professionals who were already working, but also, the future generations, starting with potentially, university and high school level. And third, to give back to the community by helping organizations that didn't have funding or resources to build their own cybersecurity programs, like charities or municipal governments, places where, they just couldn't afford the talent or, couldn't afford to outsource, building cybersecurity programs. So Jason brought together, a good group of CISOs, some sponsors, and really kind of started us down this path. And it's been a really interesting journey to be on for the last 4.5 years.
It sounds so incredibly rewarding.
Yeah, absolutely.
And very, very exciting. That actually brings up another issue. So, Cybersecurity Ventures predicts that there will be a 3.5 million unfilled cybersecurity roles by 2021. That's up from 1 million in 2014. So, what do you foresee the challenges being in not only recruiting talent, retaining cybersecurity personnel, but also being able to upskill the people that you have in a quick manner?
Sure. Well, I think you hit on all three of them, right? So number one is, everybody is short-staffed. So what is the pipeline of cybersecurity talent, that's coming into, our organizations? Now, we just heard from, the governor of the state of Maryland, here this morning at the Global Cyber Innovation Summit, who talked about the university system here in Maryland graduating more cybersecurity trained professionals than anywhere else in the United States. So that's a great start. But we also have to go kind of a layer before university and college and, trade schools and things like that. And we have to get young people interested, at the middle and high school levels. So any STEM programs or, technology programs, that could get kids interested in cybersecurity, are really amazing. Actually, my team at Blackstone partnered with the Security Advisor Alliance a couple of months ago to host about 100 students from a Brooklyn school, at Microsoft's headquarters in New York, and we ran through a Capture the Flag program to show them, some interesting security techniques. And we talked to them about, careers in cybersecurity and, how they might be able to follow those. And hopefully that gets them interested, and maybe they study cybersecurity in college, and then, they get some internships and so on and so forth. Also, as you said, we CISOs have to find ways to retain the talent that we have. And I think what has been helpful and supportive of that, are two things. One is automation, being able to automate, kind of rote, redundant, boring tasks, especially anything that a tier one entry level person could do. If you can automate that, then you can take kind of some of the mundane work away from, those entry-level people and give them more interesting problems to work on. The more you can do that, the more interested they are, and hopefully they stay longer. I think the second piece is, as more organizations are moving to the cloud, I think we're in this transition period where, as I said earlier, when I started my career, people didn't have firewalls. Right? So everybody had an opportunity to learn, there were like 10 security vendors, so you were learning technologies as the industry grew. Now we have this new phase where most companies are moving into the cloud. It's a whole new set of technologies. And while the fundamental principles haven't changed, we have an opportunity to give our teams the ability to learn new skills that will probably carry them in their careers for the next 10 to 15 to 20 years. So I think that's a huge part of retention also.
Absolutely. You brought up an interesting point. How do you think AI is going to integrate with cyber jobs of the future? Do you think there's going to be an overlap? Do you think there will be changes in the way we actually work?
I think there will be some. I'm actually a big proponent of not over-automating. So for us, one of the core automation use cases is we analyze emails that have been reported to us, by end users. And we collect a whole bunch of data, and if we can tell with 100% certainty, that the email is spam or malicious or whatever, we may respond back to that user in an automated way. But I don't like to over-automate, because the other thing that we're encouraging by asking users to report suspicious emails to us is to engage with us in a conversation about cybersecurity. A user might say, hey, I think this is suspicious. I know this person, but I wasn't expecting this email from them. If we over-automate the response, then a question that a user might ask might not get answered, and we break that engagement, piece. So yes, we want to use machine learning and artificial intelligence and automation to gather all of the information so that an analyst doesn't have to spend 45 minutes collecting it. But I still want the analyst to double check all of that information that's been collected and make sure that if the user wants to be engaged, that we engage that user. So I think that automation, AI, ML, all of these things can help us make decisions faster, but we need to evaluate carefully whether they should make the decisions at all.
You brought up the cloud. So what are some of the considerations that you see in storing data, apps in the cloud, and even moving some of companies' critical infrastructure to the cloud? What do you see the concerns being?
Well, I think, there's been a lot of talk about, Amazon's shared responsibility model. And I think that, using that as context, we can really see how we need to approach things for any infrastructure as a service or software as a service provider. When you sign up with one of these providers, they only have a limited set of responsibilities. Essentially, they're providing the data center, they're providing the servers, they're providing physical security. They guarantee that, your customer information is segmented from another customer's information, right? But when you're using software as a service, or when you're deploying applications into those cloud infrastructures, you have the responsibility of configuring settings and turning on security controls, and if you're not doing that, then you're not going to be able to adequately secure your data. I generally think that fundamentally the security principles that we've been working with, for 15 or 20 years as security has become an industry, all apply. The question is, how do they apply, and what processes, technologies, and techniques do we use to implement them? As an example, we have preventative controls, in our data center architectures, right? We have a perimeter, we have an IDS, we have endpoint controls, we have other types of, technologies that we've put in place to prevent bad things from happening. Well, when we move into the cloud, we have to identify what the preventative controls are to prevent bad things from happening. Do we use native tools? Do we move our security stack from the data center into the cloud? Or do we look for new third-party tools that integrate into these new cloud architectures? Same thing with detection and response. How do we get the logs that were really easy to get in our data center because we just kind of pointed everything at one place? Now we've got tens or hundreds of infrastructure as a service and software as a service deployments. How do we get those logs into one place so that we have the same level of visibility and we can detect when something bad happens? And then how do we deal with response, right? Amazon probably is only going to give you a certain level of data, for you to conduct incident response exercises with. And you might not ever be able to rip out a hard drive, and take it somewhere and put it in a safe so that it's forensically sound. How do you create a forensically sound image, of something that happened, on a server in AWS? Right. So really, the challenge is taking these fundamental security principles that most CISOs and security teams are familiar with and applying them into these new environments and learning how these new environments can enable us to do the things that we know are best practice.
That's a lot.
It is.
And it's so exciting too, because there's so many new technologies and new ways of securing things within the cloud, whether you stay on or off-prem. Also, speaking of that, I wanted to get your take on what are the biggest challenges that you think businesses and consumers face when trying to secure IoT devices and having them on their networks?
I think the biggest challenge that we face is that we don't know, right? We don't know what they do. We don't know how they do it. We don't pay any attention to where they're connecting to, right? We don't know when they're turned on and what they're recording when they are turned on. It's just they are, really small black boxes at this point. And because of their size and level of sophistication and the fact that they generally do one thing, whether it's a light bulb or a refrigerator or whatever, I don't think that they were built with security embedded in them, or they were built with security in mind. They were built simply to, perform the function of a light or a thermostat or a dishwasher, and they need internet access to do that. I don't think that the security is necessarily there, and, we don't know. The problem is the prevalence of these devices is growing at an exponential rate. And the more of them there are, and the more of them there are in people's homes and businesses, the more of a target they will be. We talk about the state of malware as most malware is written for Windows because that's what businesses run, right? And, if you think about this 5, 10, 15 years from now, businesses will probably still run Windows, but businesses will be full of IoT devices. So will the attackers transition, to writing, malicious software for IoT devices or hacking IoT devices, because that's what can have the biggest impact and potential financial gain for them.
And do you think that sometimes these devices can be on a corporate network but not really noticed, like that corporate smart TV you have in the conference room? So do you think there should be some standards for how you have IoT in the business and also how you work within IoT when people are working from home?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that all makes perfect sense, in the context of if you take a step all the way back, in cybersecurity fundamentals, and it's knowing what your assets are and what needs to be protected and what's on your network and being able to identify, anomalies, et cetera.
Well, I've got a couple of other kind of fun questions for you.
Okay.
So tell me something about you that's fun and exciting that most people probably wouldn't know about you.
All right, so I think this is fun for me, and I think that some of my coworkers and my family probably find it fun because they benefit from it. But I have, between home and office, I probably have no less than 10 ways of making coffee, right? I have an AeroPress, a Chemex, a pour over, two pour overs. I have a large drip coffee machine, a French press. I have almost every method of making coffee that you will try because I'm always trying, to get a better cup than the previous one. And despite all of the apparatuses that I have, the other component of the search is trying to get great fresh coffee. So I'm actually a member of a coffee subscription service that fresh roasts and ships me coffee every 2 weeks, so that I get it from a local roaster within 48 hours of when they roasted it. So it's really kind of a little bit of a passion thing for me because the ritual of drinking coffee from the moment I wake up, until the point at which I decide it's too late to have caffeine, is
Which is when?
It depends on the day, but it might be 3 or 4 o'clock. That being said, I did one of those DNA tests that told me that I have a gene that puts me in a certain part of the population that is gifted for metabolizing caffeine. So if I were an athlete, which clearly I'm not, but if I were, and I consumed caffeine 30 minutes before some sort of exercise or training, I would get a performance benefit out of it. So like I just metabolize caffeine well. So, 4 o'clock is probably my limit.
Now, have you found that perfect cup of coffee, that perfect blend yet?
I don't think so. I mean, as part of this subscription service that I've been a member of for, I don't know, 6 months now, I did find, one roaster that I really, really like, called Klatch, with a K. They have some really nice blends, but I think I'm starting, to get better at figuring out what I don't like, and trying to tune, the subscription service's algorithm so that I get better coffee, every couple of weeks.
Well, thank you so much for coming down and for joining us and being part of the Ask the CISO series sponsored by Fortinet. This
My
was
pleasure.
such a fun interview.
Thanks.
Thank you.